Good morning, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Welcome to this session, Unpacking the SSF Guidelines, Investing Social Protection for Securing Blue Justice for Small-Scale Fisheries. My name is Daniela Kalikoski. I am with the Equitable Livelihoods of the Fisheries and Aquaculture Division of FAO, and I will be moderating this session today. So this session is part of an Unpacking SSF Guidelines session. So you probably know that we had already had 3 sessions last week and this week, and tomorrow we'll have the next one. So each session deals with one chapter of the SSF guidelines. Please do not miss any of our webinars. You still have the chance to do it via YouTube. So I will introduce very briefly the panelists. So as I said, I'm Daniela Kalikoski. I will be moderating the session tonight. I have the support from my colleagues from FAO, Greta and Ruben Sanchez. And the panelists today will be Sebastian Matthew from ICSF, Mauricio Mireles from FAO, Regional Office in Latin America and the Caribbean, Fabio Veras from IPCIG, Kozao Man from the World Fish, Yuko Okamura from the World Bank, and Durti Bossi from the European Commission. So I will introduce them later on before they start their presentations. So I'll just provide you with some logistic information. So if you have any question during the presentations, please submit your questions through the Q&A session here. Include your full name and affiliation when you submit your question, and please also use this button to communicate with us. So resources will be circulated and made available online through this chat, as well as to the FAO Social Protection and Fisheries website. And the webinar will help to shape the upcoming International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. So I can see that 2 participants have raised their hands. So I don't know if there is anything urgent at this stage. So I ask Greta and Ruben, please, to verify that. If there is anything, please let me know. Otherwise, I will go ahead. Okay, so before starting the presentation from the panelists, I would just like to put a video which summarizes Chapter 6 of the SSF Guidelines. This chapter is dedicated to social development, employment, in decent work. So I will put the video now, so we can have 3 minutes to watch the video, and this video hopefully will set the scene for the whole session.
%90 of capture fishers in the world work in small-scale fisheries. Many more work in the processing, trade, and allied sectors. Together, they contribute to over 50% of fish catch in developing countries.
Despite this contribution to global food security and livelihoods, small-scale fishing communities are often the poorest and most marginalized. In 2014, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations endorsed a set of guidelines and outlined a series of core objectives to protect and enhance the impact of small-scale fisheries around the world.
One of these objectives is the social and economic development of small-scale fishing communities so they can enjoy their human rights. This includes their right to an adequate standard of living and work, ensuring that their health, education, and other essential needs are met.
In many developing countries, fisheries are unregulated and workers must endure long hours, poor safety, and exploitation. Often, fishers and fish workers have no access to social protection or insurance.
At the same time, violence, child labor, and sexual abuse are common in the industry. Fish workers are often unorganized and their roles in the global economy go unrecognized. The participation of small-scale fishing communities in decision-making is key to their development, and that's where the SSF guidelines come in.
They recommend that states invest in the human development of these communities, including housing, water and sanitation, healthcare, and education. Children should have access to affordable education so they can acquire the skills and employment of their choice.
Decent and gainful work should be promoted for formal and informal workers all along the fisheries value chain. This includes migrant workers, who play an important role in fisheries globally. States should cooperate to address the causes of migration and its implications for the sustainability of the sector.
The guidelines advocate for the eradication of forced labor, violence, and debt bondage, with special care that the needs of women and other vulnerable groups are addressed. To do so, states should integrate occupational health and safety into the management of fisheries. This includes writing appropriate safety laws, collecting data on accidents, raising awareness, and ensuring compliance with safety regulations. National regulations should be consistent with international human rights standards and guidelines of the United Nations.
Social security and access to credit and insurance schemes are also important to tide over the risks faced by small-scale fishing communities. Recognizing their contribution to local and global economies, the states should ensure that these fish workers benefit from new development like tourism and small-scale aquaculture.
On the whole, the guidelines bring states and small-scale fishing communities together to ensure decent work and an adequate standard of living for these communities.
By protecting and furthering the rights of these communities, the guidelines help preserve their cultures and ways of life.
So as showed in the video, Chapter 6 of the SSF Guidelines calls for social and economic development, so small-scale fishers can enjoy their human rights. So this includes the right to adequate access to social protection for all. And hopefully this webinar today will provide some very insightful ways of how we can best implement this at the country level. Social protection is defined by FAO as the set of policies, programs that can be both formal and informal, and that address economic, environment, and social vulnerabilities to food insecurity and poverty, with the objective to protect and promote livelihoods standards to their life cycles. Despite the importance of the SSF for social and economic development, small-scale fishers are not systematically included within the social protection systems, including social insurance, given their limited formalization as well as barriers to access. So this webinar today is going to try to discuss some of key questions around social protection in small-scale fisheries. So some of the panelists will be addressing how to create an enabling environment for the implementation of the SSF guidelines through a human rights-based approach for the adequate access to social protection. We will discuss how social protection systems can represent an important pillar for achieving blue justice, sustainable fisheries, and socio-economic development through a coherent approach between social protection and fisheries management. And we are also going to discuss how social protection could be used not only as a short-term crisis response intervention, but also for building back better in longer term. So do not miss out the opportunity. Please do send your questions to panelists via the chat while they are presenting. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Sebastian from the International Collective in Support of Fish Workers. He works with he has been coordinated inputs into several key negotiations and instruments at FAO, such as the SSF guidelines, in close consultation with fisher workers organizations, especially to promote the interests and the needs of small-scale fishers and fishing communities, and to strengthen the social leg of sustainable development. Sebastian, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela, for that kind introduction. Can I share my screen, please? Yeah. Yeah, so at the outset, I would like to refer to the flagship report of ILO on world social protection, which actually defines what we should mean by social protection. ILO says that essentially social protection refers to social security. And that's a very important point to keep in mind, and that it is a human right. And it covers policies and programs that are designed to reduce and prevent poverty and vulnerability. So if you recall, the guidelines are developed, small-scale fisheries guidelines are developed in the context of poverty eradication and food security. Therefore, it's very important to keep in mind the prevention of poverty and vulnerability as the key elements of social protection. And then if we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it talks about the right to an adequate standard of living on the one hand, and then it also talks about the right to security in the event of lack of livelihood. Therefore, this is very important to remember the last part of that particular Article 25. So essentially, social protection is referring to security in the event of lack of livelihood. Therefore, that important dimension to be kept in mind. And then when you come to the guidelines, the small-scale fisheries guidelines essentially talks about how to enhance access to various social development. And then it says that social security protection for workers in small-scale fisheries is very important along the value chain. And if you look at the FAO Declaration for Sustainable Fisheries 2020, it talks about the importance of access to social protection programs for fishers and fish workers in both agriculture, in fisheries and aquaculture. And then if you look at the SDGs in the target dealing with ending poverty, one, as well as the target dealing with reducing inequality, we can see that there is a reference to social protection. And in the context of poverty, it talks about implementing nationally appropriate social protection systems, and including flows. And when we refer to flows, it means basic social security that has to be guaranteed. And it gives a timeline of 2030 to achieve a substantial coverage of the poor and the vulnerable. So therefore, I see this meeting as an important opportunity to talk about the need for how to increase the coverage of social protection in the small-scale fisheries and aquaculture in particular. And then in the context of reducing inequality, the SDGs refer to social protection policies to be adopted for achieving greater equality in society. Therefore, you can see that this is also an important instrument when we talk about reducing inequality. And then what exactly are the social protection benefits? So there are universal benefits, which benefits everyone. And then there are categorical benefits, which maybe for some sections of children, some sections of old people. So you can choose certain categories. Then you have a means-tested social protection benefits, where you look at the capacity of the recipient or beneficiary, whether they can afford to pay or whether they're really poor. So therefore, if they're poor, you try to extend certain schemes to them. And then in the context of some sectors, we may have certain targeted benefits. For example, in the fishery sector, we might have some schemes. So largely speaking, the social protection benefits will include, as the ILO highlights in one of the recommendations, child and family benefits, maternity protection, unemployment support, employment injury benefit, sickness benefit, health protection, old age benefit, disability benefits, and survivors benefits. So these are the key 9 areas when we talk about social protection. And then how do we adopt these kind of areas? And this is mainly through a combination of either a contributory scheme or through a non-contributory scheme. So the contributory schemes, for example, are often referred to as social insurance schemes. And then non-contributory schemes are often financed by taxation. And these are basically social assistance. So in the context of fisheries, for example, if we talk about the formal workers in the fisheries sector, perhaps they would be benefiting more from contributory social insurance schemes. And if you talk about the informal sector, perhaps they would be benefiting more from the tax-financed social assistance schemes. And some examples of social protection, I'm sure that later we will hear from Brazil about Seguro Defensor Pesca. And then, of course, you have the most celebrated social protection program, which was called the Bolsa Familia in Brazil, which, of course, is now being reinvented as a new scheme called Renda Brazil, which is a conditional cash transfer program for educating children. But I think this scheme also covers a large number of children in the fishing communities. And then, of course, there are issues like the inclusion of social protection. We have done a study in the past which shows that in Costa Rica, for example, many legitimate small-scale fishers are considered illegal and they do not benefit from social security schemes. And then also there is this issue of poor awareness of social protection schemes among the poor small-scale fishers and fish workers. I mean, it's not only a case of Costa Rica. In many countries, there is a lack of awareness, which I think we need to address. And then another important dimension is the adequacy of benefit, whether the schemes that we have is adequate to address the needs of the poor. And this issue we have seen, especially discussed in the New World Social Protection Report 2017 to 19, where it highlights that in both developed and developing countries, this issue of inadequacy of benefit is a concern. So therefore, we have to see how in the fishery sector too, how we can ensure that there is a sufficient adequacy of benefits are addressed. And then in the context of South Africa, we have seen that there is often a lack of recognition of a rights-based approach by fisheries authorities, because fisheries authorities tend to see the fisheries from a technical perspective, and they may not recognize the human rights-based approach. And this kind of hinders access to social protection of the marginalized small-scale fishers. So therefore, there are all kinds of issues in the access to social protection schemes in context of fisheries. And then if we talk about social protection and fisheries, so our proposal is that we should try to see whether one can look at universal basic income or sectoral basic income or social assistance or public employment support schemes for fishing and aquaculture can be considered. And then we have to see whether some kind of a social protection flow can be employed to deal with those who cannot work in the sector, for example, children, mothers with newborns, persons with disabilities, older persons, and those who are poor and out of work. And then see whether universal coverage of social protection can integrate small-scale fisheries, fish workers, and fishing communities to make sure that it's adequately inclusive of this community. And then also very important to see that there is a further enhancement of government spending on education, health, and social protection, which can really help to meaningfully talk about social protection schemes. And then, I mean, in a time like COVID-19, we have seen, for example, that the absence of social protection has been a major impact on many small-scale fishing communities. They have nothing to fall back upon. And in fact, the number of people falling below the poverty line has really increased in many parts of the world, including in fisheries. So therefore, I think this very clearly highlights the need to design very, very inclusive schemes, especially to deal with pandemics and other type of natural disasters. And then we need to see how the complexity of livelihood, if you try to take into account, needs to have a broader perspective of different categories in fisheries that the guidelines refer to. So we have full-time, part-time, occasional, subsistence, formal, informal, migrant fishers, marine fisheries, inland fisheries, then women, indigenous people and the vulnerable and marginalized groups. So therefore, all these groups are mentioned in the guidelines. So we have to see how do you identify these type of categories, and how do you make sure what kind of social protection needs they have. So how do you tailor make social protection schemes to meet the needs of these different categories? I mean, these are all very, very important questions that I think the fisheries department may have to take the initiative and work with the social protection authorities. And then we have to see whether one can use a combination of contributory and non-contributory schemes to see how the benefit adequacy that we mentioned earlier can be reached, especially by integrating social insurance and social assistance, keeping in mind these different kind of categories we discussed above. And then for effective social protection, I think it's very important also to create conditions. So these conditions involve investing in very robust infrastructure related to health, education, housing, sanitation, drinking water, credit and insurance, affordable access to these facilities and services. So these are all points discussed in the guidelines. And then we need to talk about how do you consider preferential access, preferential treatment of women and the vulnerable and marginalized. How do you promote decent work, eradicate forced labor and debt bondage? I mean, how do you identify, for example, these kind of issues and address them? What kind of alternative income generating opportunities can be provided? And then, as earlier we also heard in that video program, how do we create an environment free from crime, violence, corruption, piracy, theft, etc.? And then also, how do you protect access to customary fishing grounds? I mean, this is also an important issue for many small-scale fishing communities, protecting their access, their tenure rights, how to preserve their culture and way of life of small-scale fishers. So all these kind of conditions can enhance the quality of social protection in small-scale fisheries. And then the three key messages that we would like to share with all of you is that universal coverage is very important. We need to see more from a universal coverage point of view rather than from a sectoral point of view. The sector should assist the universal coverage to reach all different kinds of workers and different types of communities in various kind of activities. So therefore, in our context, we are talking about small-scale fishers and fish workers. So universal coverage is very important. And then we need to consider a combination of contributory and non-contributory schemes. And then to enhancing government spending on education, health, and social protection. So that, I mean, I would like to conclude with a quote from Karl Popper, the great, thinker who really brought the world community to take social protection very seriously in the context of the impact of the market economy. So he said that the principle of social protection aims at the conservation of man and nature. So therefore, if you have very strong, effective social protection, it's not only talking about the communities, but at the end of it, we also will be able to conserve the nature that we are trying to engage with, especially in an activity like fisheries. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Thank you for your wise words, and as well as for providing us with some very good examples, and that brings really the reality of the possibilities and the difficulties of implementing social protection. So I think Sebastian reminded us that there is a commitment now through the SDGs 1.3 on the expansion of social protection, but also more importantly that this social protection should be expanded based on the needs of the small-scale fishers. So it needs to be adapted. It needs really to look at what are the vulnerabilities that they face and what are the barriers that they are facing to implement this. Also, I mean, social protection, COVID-19 to a certain extent showed us how that this is possible, that because social protection has been one of the most used social policy to protect the poor and vulnerable, it shows that it's possible. We just really need to find the best ways to implement it. And Sebastian also showed us and guided us through some feasible ways of really breaking some of these barriers. So I think it's a good momentum to introduce our next speaker, So Ruben, if you can please share your screen. So thank you very much, Mauricio Mireles, our Policy Officer for Indigenous Peoples and Social Inclusion from the FAO Regional Office in the Latin America and Caribbean. Mauricio is a sociologist and anthropologist and has been working extensively on issues related to social inclusion and the implementation of rural development policies. So prior to joining FAO, Mauricio has worked and coordinated the South-South cooperation initiatives on social protection, specifically on school feeding and family farming projects in São Tomé and Príncipe, Brazil, Ghana, Malawi, and Mozambique. Thank you so much again, Mauricio. The floor is yours.
Hi, Daniela. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and it's a fantastic opportunity and a privilege to follow Sebastian's presentation, which I think it's already provided us with a very nice framework. I was hoping that Greta would be able to put my presentation on the screen for everybody to follow. Thank you so much, Greta. So basically, what we're going to discuss a little bit is how can we create more coherence between social protection policies, programs, and fisheries policies to really ensure that no one is left behind. So first of all, I wanted to give you an overview, if we can go to the second slide, to what are the main vulnerabilities within the fisheries sector. And just to give you an idea, here we're speaking from the context of Latin America and the Caribbean. It is estimated that fisheries and aquaculture sector generates 2.4 million jobs in our region, out of which 75% are engaged in artisanal fishing and 14% in aquaculture. Interestingly enough, there are no statistics on income levels on small-scale fishers at the regional level. However, there is strong evidence of a correlation between people in the fisheries sector and poverty levels. In the case of Colombia, 68% of the households that reported fishing activity live in poverty, according to the country's multidimensional poverty index. And poverty, as you all know, is intrinsically related to food insecurity and malnutrition, as well as with informality, and is rooted in a systematic exclusion which prevents small-scale fishery from accessing basic services and social guarantees. The small-scale fishery sector is characterized by having a limited productive assets and inputs and having low levels of productivity. This is often due to structural economic and social barriers that prevent their access to market and economic competitivity, and which ultimately reduces their utilities and income. So some of the main vulnerabilities faced by small-scale fishers and fish workers, we categorize them in the following way. One, and a very important one, has to do with natural and environmental vulnerabilities, because there is high dependence on natural resources for their particular livelihoods. And when there are disruptions in that sense, whether it comes from disasters or extreme events like floods, high winds, hurricanes, drought, or other non-climate like disasters such as a tsunami or oil spills, this can really affect fish stocks. A second one has to do with economic vulnerabilities. Fishers and fisheries-dependent operators are vulnerable to temporary, seasonal, or permanent unemployment. And this is something that needs to be factoring when we're trying to design more coherence. How can we relate with these very specific economic vulnerabilities that fish workers have in the sector? So this has to do with sporadic fluctuation in availability and catchability of fish resources, or in the ability of fishers to operate at sea, owning to rough conditions. For example, do you have access to a boat? Do you own it? Is the boat insured? Do you have to go through an operator to really be able to create your own livelihood? These are all questions that we need to really think about, the specific livelihoods of fish workers, and when we're thinking of how to create this coherence. Evidently, from health-related vulnerabilities, fishing remains one of the most dangerous economic activities in the world. Some of the causes of accidents are falls, prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures, fires due to engine overheating, handling of harpoons, knives, hooks, etc. And in this context, life insurance and accident insurance are rarely accessible to small-scale fisheries, mainly because they operate in the informal sector or because they cannot afford them. So this is very, very important in terms of understanding the risks associated with this activity. Also, we can express a more general view in terms of social vulnerabilities, in terms of saying how fishers and fisheries-dependent workers include forced labor or fishing crews and processing factors workers and child labor. So because of high levels of informality, there are not a lot of regulations, and this can go in a very negative way when it comes to other sources of employment or child labor being involved in this type of sector. And that's also extremely problematic and concerning. And from a political perspective, you can see that there is a lot of political marginalization, including gender inequality, in the effective underlying causes of many other vulnerabilities and issues that may have affected and continue to affect these communities. Small-scale fishing communities have a weak political voice in most countries, leaving them unable to articulate their needs and influence national or local political decisions effectively. And if this was not sufficient, COVID-19 pandemic has really exacerbated some of these previous vulnerabilities that I have just mentioned. So in this very challenging concept and context, what is the role of social protection? Can we go to the next slide, Greta? Thank you. So basically, in this context, social protection can play a role in supporting the development of fisheries by reducing their vulnerabilities and helping them to manage the risks more effectively. This is the main message. Daniela has already provided you with the definition from the FAO side, basically saying a set of interventions to address either the economic, environmental, or social vulnerabilities to food insecurity and poverty, and to protect and promote the livelihoods of fishermen, fisherwomen in this sense. And there are different ways in which social protection can do that. And there are different ways to organize and interpret what social protection is in a very broad sense. So if we were to go into, let's say, social assistance, that means that we could work and improve the offering of cash and in-kind transfers and services to support and enable fishermen and fish workers. If we were to look at social security, that means that contributory programs that protect people from the potential financial losses linked to life cycle related events or shocks could be designed and can be offered to them. If we were to look at labor market interventions, protective measures for the working age population, which aim to enhance employment opportunities, improve skills of workers, or livelihood support. So in this sense, you can see that there is a broad spectrum in which social protection can really contribute to improving the livelihoods of fish worker and fisherwomen in that sense. And first and foremost, I think it's very important to say that social protection is key as a strategy for poverty reduction. And there is a lot of evidence to demonstrate this. So absolutely, it is a right. It is a human right that populations in Latin America and other parts of the world can request governments their support, but it also shows that this can be an investment. It is an investment that governments can do to ensure that people that are in situations of vulnerability can increase their productive capacities that can be better included in the productive potential of the sector. So I think that's a very important message to pass along. Can we go to the next one, please? So when it comes to the main barriers of access to social protection in the fisheries sector, what we see is that despite the increased need for social protection, the fisheries sector is heavily unserved by these programs. Preliminary studies show that the low reach of social protection systems to the fisheries sector is due to a mismatch of coherent policies and programs for fisheries management and broad social and economic development agenda, where the former does not account for or target the needs of the latter and vice versa. And basically what we're saying here is that as long as you develop fisheries sectors in silo and you develop social protections in a different direction without considering the specific livelihoods, the needs, and the way that the fisheries sectors operates, there is not a lot of chance to really communicate and to create a better environment. That To give you an example, in the case of our region in Peru, 97% of artisanal fisheries do not have access to pensions. In El Salvador, 93% engaged in fisheries are working in the informal sector and do not have access to Social Security. In the Caribbean, fisheries sector only accounts for 3% of vessels. 3% of vessels are insured, 17% of fishers have healthcare insurance, and only 20% have life insurance. And in many countries, social protection legislation explicitly excludes the rural population, including small-scale fishers, and do not provide alternative schemes. Generally, the barriers of accessing social protections in the fishery sectors can be categorized in legal, financial, institutional, and geographic barriers. So what do we do with this setting, right? And what's FAO's role in this? I'll show you in the next slide. Please, Greta. Okay, so basically what we're trying to say and what we're advocating for is the expansion of social protections in fisheries to effectively reach fishers, fish workers, and fish farmers along the value chain with particular emphasis on gender. I think this is crucial to understand that the great levels of disparity and the specific roles of men and women in this sector are very different. And they also need to be taken into account in order to have the right model of social protection. We need to promote linkages between social protection, agriculture, food security, nutrition, and natural resource management. Evidently, this also has to do with decent rural employment and resilience building. So basically, we're trying to create bridges. We're trying to ensure that the social development agenda, and when we come to Latin America, a very key example is to say, you usually have ministries of social development, which are very much concerned with the needs of the poor, but our population in Latin America is increasingly becoming more urban. So it is harder to put a political goal. It is harder to put a budgetary allocation specifically to look at rural issues. And when it comes to rural issues, you still have to compete with other sectors, with the agriculture sector, with the forestry sector. So we still need to do a better job of identifying what's specific to the fisheries sector and how to create those linkages in order to have a more cohesive agenda. And I think this is really what we can do and what we can offer to provide the economic case and to provide the environmental case, which is also very important. Evidence-based policy advice is really the most important thing that we can do in that sense. And basically, coherence between the social protection and agricultural domains, including fisheries, needs to be strengthened. Just to give you some of the things that we could do in the fisheries sector in order to demonstrate this level of coherence. For example, if you were to offer higher transfer levels to allow beneficiaries to meet their consumption needs and to invest in fishery activities, that could be something that needs to be done, right? So if you have a household that already receives a social protection scheme or program, how can you boost it up a little bit to ensure that they can complement their livelihood activity? Expanding social transfers to include a broader menu of complementary interventions, fishing equipment, livelihoods inputs. So if you know that this household has as a main activity their participation in the fishery sector, can you ensure or provide the necessary input for them to continue their economic activity? I think that's something very basic, but also something that could really change the ways that these programs are designed. And then enhance livelihood security by supporting fisher organizations, including women and youth associations, and increasing their access to finance, knowledge, market, and social protection programs, as well as their capacity to act as service providers. I think this is rather crucial. So just one small example, FAO has supported small-scale fish farming organizations in Colombia to create and manage a collectivity-owned revolving fund, which since then is used both as a source of soft loan credit for working capital and as a social protection safety net, given that these fishers are excluded from some public social protection mechanisms. Both organizations have evolved. The number of member farmers has increased, And they share not only the revolving fund, but also production tasks in a collaborative manner, consolidate their produce and share selling points. So basically, we can also understand that from the side of the fisheries sectors, there are formal and informal mechanisms that can be better supported by social protection traditional schemes, and that this coherence can create cost effectivity to have a less impact in the budgets, because we need to understand that governments are facing a lot of challenges in terms of budgetary cuts. Therefore, maximizing results by having a better comprehensive view of what needs to happen. And I have one more slide, Greta. Thank you. So in that sense, I think it's also very important to stress that social protection can foster sustainable management of natural resources. It is not only about supporting people in situations of vulnerability, but it can also have a very positive impact on sustainable management of natural resources. Small-scale fishers are disproportionately affected by environmental hazards, which can lead families to resort to negative coping strategies, which could trigger and perpetuate a negative spiral of vulnerability and poverty. Social protection schemes, with their different instruments and linkages with other poverty reduction schemes, can enable households and individuals to better deal with risks while remaining in compliance with natural resource management measures. For example, fishing seasons or established marine protected areas. These needs to be agreements, right? If there's going to be a season of the year in which the fisherwomen and the fishermen are not allowed to get into the lake, let's say, what can you do to support their economic and their livelihoods during this season in which they have committed not to exploit the fishes at the lake? These are some of the questions that we really need to be able to respond in order to provide a good social protection system. And I think Fabio is going to give you a lot of information about very good examples in the case of Brazil that are also very important for this discussion. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. Thank you for reminding us that despite the importance of social protection, small-scale fishers are really not able to reach many of these programs. No? Also, thank you for reminding us the role that social protection plays in the natural resource management and the importance really of reconciling conservation with socioeconomic development, and the role that social protection has to implement that. So I think this gives us a very good link to the next panelist, Fabio Veras, who is a senior research coordinator for the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth. Fabio is the IPEA, the Applied Economic Research Institute of the Brazilian government think tank. He is the focal point for the IPEA, and he has worked with impact evaluation of cash transfers in many countries, such as Brazil, Paraguay, Mozambique, and Yemen. He has had his work published in several journals, and he has written book chapters on the comparative analysis of cash transfer programs. So looking forward to hearing your presentation, Fabio. Fabio is going to talk about the role of reconciling conservation with socioeconomic development using the Brazil Unemployment Benefit Program. Thank you, Fabio. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, please.
Oh, okay, thank you. Let's just go to the beginning of the presentation. I was at the end. So thank you, Daniela. Thank you for the invitation to share the work we have been doing at the IPCIG with FAO on these broad assessments of Brazil's unemployment insurance for artisanal fishers during the closed fishing season. So what I'm going to try to do here is actually to navigate a little bit the guiding questions that had been shared in Daniela's presentation in order to present you what has been the Brazilian experience. And it has already passed 30 years because the first legislation about this unemployment insurance, the seguro-defeso for artisanal fishers, is from 1991. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually to present you a little bit what is seguro-defeso, what are the objectives in reconciling both environmental and socio-economic objectives. Then we are going to show, and that refers a bit to the presentation that Sebastian did on how these unemployment benefits is linked to the broad social protection system in Brazil. And it's very important to understand how it operates, because it's not like something completely isolated. It's well integrated in the social protection system. Then I'm going to show you just one slide to show a little bit how it has evolved. It has actually grown a lot, and that has raised a lot of questions as well from the part of the Ministry of Finance, for example. And then we're going to show what's actually original from this project that we have with FAO is some findings of an impact evaluation to show the socioeconomic benefits of the seguro-defeso to the beneficiaries. So the first part, what is seguro-defeso and what are the objectives? So basically the seguro-defeso is an unemployment benefit that has the value of 1 minimum wage that's paid to artisanal fishers during the closed fishing season. So basically, if we look at the definition of social protection and what has been highlighted in the UN chart, so basically during that period, it's assumed that the fishers are under involuntary unemployment. So they cannot provide their livelihoods, then they would need some income support to keep their livelihoods. So the objective here is actually intertwined, because basically we are ensuring a basic income to fishers during the closed fishing season, but there is also another objective, that's to prevent that the economic hardship that they would go through because they cannot fish, they cannot have access to their livelihoods, may lead to non-compliance with the fishing ban. So in that sense, this, what can be seen as this pure social protection program, has also an environmental dimension that's to preventing that the ban is not obeyed by the fishers due to the economic hardship. So that's basically the two objectives of the program. So, but one of the challenges that this program had over time was actually how to define and how to identify the artisanal fishers. So basically, the several definitions that have been adopted highlight that they need to work on their own account, so they are self-employed, or they work in a regime with the family support, what we call the family economy, to have access to seguro-defeso. But then to have access to it, there are some things that need to happen. So the first thing that needs to happen is actually on the environmental side. So it's basically that a fishing closed season is adopted by the Ministry of Agriculture, Livestock and Supply, and then it is regulated. So that's the first thing that needs to help. So there is what we can say that's external intervention that says, look, in this particular area, there's this particular species that needs to be protected during that period to preserve the fishing stock. So basically that's the first step, to identify where in the country, either in the continent, on the coast, the fishing is not going to be permitted for these couple of months. Then there is the issue of eligibility criteria. So how we identify artisanal fishers in Brazil. So the first thing that needs to happen is that they need to be registered in the fishing activity registry of the Ministry of Agriculture. The other thing that's required, and that's actually the link that we have with the broader social protection system, is that they need to be registered in the Brazil Social Security Agency as a segurado especial, as a special insurer. So basically they contribute to the social security system in a way that's adapted to their livelihoods. So the contribution is not based on a certain percentage of their monthly income or something that is assumed as monthly income, because they don't have something like that, a wage, on the wage they could contribute, but actually it's a contribution based on the revenue that they get from the fishing activity. So, and that's very similar. We're going to see what the family farmers have access to Brazil. And it's important to keep in mind that does give the right to, of course, to this unemployment benefit, but also to other social security benefits and branches. The other thing that the artisanal fisher needs to show, and it's basically that they have been working in fishery at least for the past 12 months or in between two defeso periods, or two bans in fishing. And for that, they need to be linked to an association of fishermen that could prove that. The other important aspect is that in order to receive this unemployment benefit, they cannot receive other social insurance or social assistance benefits. But there are exceptions, and basically the exceptions are linked to the segurado especial, special insurer status. So, for example, for the accident benefit, work-related accident benefits, survivor pension, all these they can receive, and I think it also includes maternity benefits that can be received. So how Seguro Defeso is linked to the Brazil social protection system? So we can see there are different dimensions. So in terms of the financing, that's quite important, is the same source of financing for the standard unemployment benefit for private formal sector workers in the country. So the social contribution that's paid by the employees in the formal sector, that forms a fund, and this fund, 40% of it is dedicated to the unemployment benefits. So what we can say that this eligibility criteria, the condition that they contribute to social security, it does not mean that these resources are actually meant to finance the unemployment benefit. So here we can say that we have the solidarity funding of the unemployment benefit schemes for the artisanal fishers in Brazil. The other aspect, and I have already mentioned it, is the social security special status that they have that's similar to the family farmers. So they contribute for certain amounts of the commercialization of the sales of their produce. And that is 1%, 1.02%, I think, of the gross revenue that they can get from the business, from the sales.
Fabio,
and also yes?
You have 5 minutes.
Okay, it's okay.
Thank you.
And then for the social assistance, that's quite important as well, is that they do have access to the Bolsa Familia benefits. But during the months in which they are paid the unemployment insurance, they do not receive the Bolsa Familia benefits. For the other months, they do receive it. So that's a way in which the coherence between the social security or the contributory side has been made aligned with the social assistance one. So how has Seguro Defeso evolved in the past 30 years? So there has been lots of regulatory changes. Most of the changes in the early 2000s were actually changes in the eligibility criteria that had the effect of increase the number of beneficiaries and the total expenditure with the program. So we can see here that, for example, the requirement to be registered in the General Register of Fishing Activity, RGP, has been lowered from 3 years to 1 year, and that has led to a 63% increase in the number of beneficiaries between 2003 and 2004. Expenditure have also increased a lot, not only due to the inflation, of course, but also due to real increase in the minimum wage, and also to the increase in number of beneficiaries. It has increased 16% per year on average. But this huge increase has led to some criticism. So lots of criticism in the way it has been implemented, and in the way the monitoring was being done, that may be prone to fraud, and also that may have led to inclusion and exclusion errors. So one of the dimensions that we didn't have much information about was actually on the socioeconomic impacts of the Seguro Defeso. So we did have a lack of robust impact evaluation. So most of the assessments that have been done were assessments of the implementation of qualitative assessments with the fishers. And there was also lots of lack of data on both the defeso, on the fishing ban, and also on the socioeconomic characteristics of the beneficiaries. So this research project that we had with FAO basically tried to fill in some of these gaps. So we looked at the database of the employment insurance, in which we could identify who were the fishers that have benefited from the unemployment insurance in the past 30 years. And we matched them with the social registry, which is the single registry that informs the target policies in Brazil. Just to have an idea of the overlap between these two databases, we could identify 50% of the fishers since 1991. And in the most recent years, from 2014 onwards, for example, we could identify 96% of them. What does it mean? It does mean that this population, as we saw in the previous presentations, they are poor and they are vulnerable. We have an overrepresentation of female, of non-whites, and also of the poorest. We can see, for example, that the household per capita for 86% of the total beneficiaries is below a quarter of the minimum wage. So, and only 6% is above half of the minimum wage. So what we tried to do, we tried to have a counterfactual, and basically the counterfactual here could not be between those who get the benefit and those who do not get the benefit. So the assessment that we did was what happened to a family that has a beneficiary of the employment insurance when they stay longer in the Seguro Defeso program. And here I'm going to summarize some of the findings, and it's really interesting because we tried to look at the social development dimensions. So how social protection was connecting to some advancements in terms of social development. And we looked at education, for example, and we could see that in terms of child education, those households who had a beneficiary who had stayed longer in the program actually had a much higher probability to have the children attending school and getting a higher level of education. The same thing we found for the youth. Basically, we tried to see the proportion of youth who were out of school, but also out of work. And what we could find is actually those who stay longer, they have a lower proportion of these young people. So young people are either studying or they are working. We're also capable of measuring some improvement in the quality of the housing. That's an investment that the fishers can do. And also that the program prevents them to seek alternative source of work. And here we can have a negative or a positive reading of this, but basically we try to see that they don't need to engage with negative coping mechanisms. So basically, just to summarize what are the key messages when we look at the unemployment benefits for artisanal fishers in Brazil, we think that it is an interesting example on how social protection can be adapted to the needs and livelihood partners of workers, in this case of the fishers, who do not have a regular flow of income, so that they can somehow contribute to social security and benefit from it, but not in a standard format. And the other aspect that's relevant is how artisanal fishers can be protected during closed fishing seasons, combining both the environmental and the social protection objectives. But it also reveals challenges, and the challenge regards to the coherence of the environmental priorities and social protection needs of the vulnerable population. And this may have to do with this huge increase in coverage. So the needs of the population were very large, and we are not as sure about the environmental priorities in terms of how often, for example, the defeso are revised. And finally, the other challenge that we had in doing this evaluation is actually the lack of information for monitoring evaluation and the lack of integration in the database of the different institutions that are involved in the implementation of this intervention. So thank you very much for the presentation. And if you have any questions, just type in the chat. Thank you. Thank you, Daniela. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Fabio. And I think this, I mean, just as you said, no, there is a lack of information about it. And I think this impact evaluation that FAO is doing in collaboration with IPCIG is really an attempt, no, to really to look at that and to fill this gap, no. And I think it is very interesting and very encouraging, no, some of the results that you are finding in terms of education and employment and youth employment. So I think that's ties very well with what Sebastian was mentioning in his presentation, no, in terms of really the importance of looking at education, jobs outside, inside the fishery sector, as well as housing and other rights, no, to fishers. So I think this is it's very encouraging, and hopefully we really can make some progress in terms of this evidence-based impact evaluation. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Kozao Mam from the World Fish in Cambodia. And Kozao works on engaging local communities and relevant stakeholders in community fisheries management and promoting fisheries productivity in the floodplain rice field systems with community fish refuge. He has over 15 years of experience in wetland resource management, including protected area planning. Kozao holds a master's degree from Dalhousie University in Canada and a Bachelor of Fisheries Science from the Royal University of Agriculture in Cambodia. Thank you very much, Kozao. The floor is yours.
Thank you for introducing me, as well as the opportunity for me to talk here. Actually, I'm going to share what we have found in our study here on the coherence between social protection and small-scale fishery policy, and some challenge in fact. Actually, given my background and experience, more specifically on fishery, I'm very limited on knowledge on the social protection. I think I will learn more from here, and also see that a lot of information I could capture, and it's also very impressive. Okay, just touch base a little bit on the background of social protection system in Cambodia. It's quite a recent policy and intervention in the country. The first social protection policy framework was first introduced into our rectangular strategy. It's the country social economic policy platform for 2013-2018. Actually, program had started, an activity started sometime before, but it started to formulate it, the platform, a policy started to formulate at this point that lay foundation for the integrated social protection system. The framework had two principal objectives. Then one is human development. The second one is emergency response. Then the framework was updated for 2016-2025 and was approved in 2017. Focus on two main pillars: social assistance and social security. Actually, until 2017, Cambodia's social protection was seen as fragmented and not necessarily poor. There were programs, quite many programs addressing human development, such as scholarship and school feeding program. It's very basic, but it had a lot the poor in rural area in particular, including those engaging in small-scale fishery. The program cover food for work, cash transfer, and the largest and perhaps the most successful one, coverage more participants, perhaps the Health Equity Fund to address emergency response in health sector. Of note was the link of an ID pool mechanism to the introduction of the National Health Equity Fund that provide information on who were the poor. But as our panelists talked earlier, there were some problem and barrier for the small-scale fisher or small-scale fisher stakeholder to benefit from the social protection program for a number of reasons, including the more important, I think, data information. There were not enough information or data on, in fact, who were the small-scale fisher even. Because in the country, we talk about fishing, we talk about subsistence, and we talk about rice farming is a major occupation, and in many statistical survey or census, when asked for fishing, they ask in the form of like a profession, but many people do it like doing fishing as part of their subsistence livelihood, but not as a professional fisher. So that a major barrier to for the small-scale fisher to benefit from social protection program. In the same line, many early social protection programs such as Food for Work or Cash for Work had targeted like improvement of hard infrastructure, which were mainly in on land. And if we talk about Cambodia context, many of the small-scale fisher or small-scale fisher stakeholder living in the area in the floodplain in particular, or even some live in the floating community in the vast freshwater lake, and so they move from place to place. So it's difficult for them to get registered or to identify whether they were eligible to get the financial assistance or to seek social protection. That very crucial, and given the importance of the ID pool mechanism, later on, the Ministry of Planning, who coordinate for the survey for the implementation of the ID pool program, require more involvement of relevant agency, the national agency and subnational, including non-governmental organization and development partner to improve mechanism. So that provide an important improvement. With that, the agency agree that that ID pool provide an important national guideline to identify who were the poor, and also that provide information to serve multiple social assistance program from the time on. And with that, coordination and targeting of various social assistance programs had been improved. And now I want to talk more on the fisheries sector. I would like to let you know that much of the fishery in Cambodia is inland. Only a small, we have only short coastline with small marine fishery. And the inland fishery of the Cambodia of the country had undergone a reform, in particular in 2012, when commercial fishing was abolished. That gave a large tract of the fishery under management of small-scale fishing for subsistence by the locally organized community group called community fishery, who have now become the main focus of the support or the main stakeholder of small-scale fisher in the country. And if agency talking about supporting small-scale fish stakeholder, they normally refer to community fishery. But there are many other as well who engage in small-scale fishery-related activities such as processing or trading.
Kozal, you have less than 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, with that, it provides an important security for community because access to fishing is open, and the community receive a lot of support to build their capacity to not only manage the fishery but also to improve their livelihood. At the local level, some community fishery member had become a part of local mechanism for the ID4 program. So that contribute to improve the ID4 mechanism, including what we call on-demand ID4 that allow for people to who have been fallen into poverty, including because of recent COVID-19 now, to apply for poverty assessment to be eligible for financial assistance. And when we talk about at the National Fishery Agency, some officials have also been have more awareness on the social protection, and they even propose for inclusion of provision in the current review of the fishery law. Actually, there has been policy, there has been challenge to enhance coherence between the social protection and the small-scale fishery policy, because the system, the social protection system, relatively small, and the focus now seems to be still on the general group who are more vulnerable, such as pregnant women, garment worker, people with disability, and elderly. So that doesn't give specific on the small-scale fisher. And recent policy also focus more on social insurance, which is contributory, but the social small-scale fisher normally operate in the non-formal sector. So that's still an issue, and there is a limited policy to provide incentive to include small-scale fisher in the social protection program, because the sector doesn't provide revenue to the government anymore, and because of the relatively great with fishery resource, the government do not see that the fishery resource can sustain long-term livelihood of the community. So that's a challenge. But there are incentive, what we call mechanism in place already. For example, with the introduction of the new social policy framework, the National Social Policy Protection Council is established, chaired by the Prime Minister, with executive committee housed with the Ministry of Economy Finance. So this provides leverage for more finance to support to the social protection that can, if managed properly, the small-scale fisher can also be a part of covered by the program. And there is another important mechanism. In Cambodia, we have government donor technical working group that provide a platform for government and donor to negotiate, to dialogue on the progress and program to be formulated so that we can have improved performance. And the other important mechanism is the National Social Development Plan that is coordinated by the Ministry of Planning. So each sector has to have their input into the plan. So this is open. This is also an opportunity in the future that the fishery agency can also include the provision on the social protection to cover the fishery. So although we have some challenges to improve coherence in the policy, there are already mechanism in place. I think we can piggyback so that we can improve the coverage of the small-scale fisher who face distinct challenge from other sector of population. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kozal. Thank you so much also for reminding us the importance of inland fisheries, and also, I mean, the importance of really engaging into these multi-sectoral dialogues, policy dialogue, which is very, very important. You also mentioned the ID pool. The registry has been also mentioned by Fabio in his presentation. So those are some of the very important mechanisms to strengthening the social protection processes. So I would like to introduce our next speaker, Yuko Okamura, from a senior economist in social protection and jobs, global practice at the World Bank. So through operational and analytical engagements at the country level, she has supported social protection dialogue in reforms in Asia, Middle East, in Africa since 2008. So the importance of these dialogues that we were just mentioning. So she's currently co-leading the social assistance program, facilitating the knowledge generation and dissemination in this domain. So she is now also leading a new activity to strengthen the synergies between social protection and fisheries in a changing climate, in close collaboration with other sectors and external partners. Yuko, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Dani, and good afternoon, good evening, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here and participate in this fascinating discussion. So I'm Yuko Okamura, and I'm actually representing my World Bank team, including the global lead, Ugo Gentilini, and also another colleague who is another main author of the report, for which I'm going to be using quite a bit during my presentation today. And his name is Mohamed Al-Menfi. Next slide, please. So my intervention is going to be really around the role of the social protection and how it's been really used in the COVID response. And I really would like to do my best to integrate in the fishery and the blue aspect in that discussion. Then I'm really looking forward to getting your feedback. In terms of the main questions, as I said, what's the experience over the past 1.5 years? And how this experience and the social protection response in the COVID context can be really put through in the medium.
Yuko, we cannot hear you. I think we are having a technical problem, so I hope our colleagues from TBTI will be able to resolve. So perhaps in the interest of time, can I propose that we move to the next speaker? So while we resolve the technical issue with Yuko. Yes, okay. So I will pass the floor to Dirty Boss from the European Commission, and she has worked for over 20 years in development policy and international cooperation. Currently, her work covers social protection in INPA headquarters. Previously, she led various teams in INPA headquarters and in delegations in human development, communication and visibility, and finance and contracts. Before joining the European Commission, she was a speechwriter and worked in the Latin America department of the German Ministry of Development, Cooperation and Development. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Yeah, I will keep it a bit short, and I have to say So Yuko already gave the perfect introduction also for me. So just to understand, we are from the policymaker side here, representing European Commission, INTPA, its Department for International Partnerships. So my presentation will be quite short, and I will try to explain you how we have reacted to support our partner countries through short-term social protection measures throughout the COVID crisis, and how we are supporting social protection programs for many years now from our side, and a bit what are the lessons learned to feed more into the, I think Yuko is back. I don't know. Should I continue or?
Yes, she's back, but please continue, and then we pass the presentation to her, if that's okay with you.
I will keep it short, as I said. Thank you. Look, so really from the policy angle, so trying to address the main questions that Yuko has just shown as well. So how the short term can lead into in the medium long term when it comes to social protection measure, how we have learned as well from our response in the COVID crisis. And then I tried to connect this, of course, to the SSF guidelines. Having said this, I'm not a specialist on fish, I'm a specialist on social protection and beyond, hopefully. Let's go to the next slide, please. So just to show you quickly what we have done, and this is being reflected, I guess, in a lot of studies I've seen from other main development partners as well, and from countries, what we have been doing throughout the COVID crisis in terms of social protection. I mean, you might, of course, not know all those programs. So in a nutshell, it means we have been speeding up the implementation of our programs. We have so-called geographic programs as partner countries. And then we have so-called thematic programs, which are the flagships. So with the geographic programs, we have roughly 28 programs in social protection supporting partner countries. We have been front-loading payments, softening conditionalities. We do a lot of budget support, which of course is linked to conditions. We did top up on existing programs, topping up with more social protection programs, adding cash transfer and food aid. So this is nothing new for all of you, I guess. So cash transfer has been the measure in social protection to respond to COVID crisis. So second point here, thematic program. We are working now with 18 partner countries under the so-called thematic program, where we are trying to link synergies between social protection and public finance management. And yes, money has been mentioned here. So, but having the necessary funds in order to provide social protection is not the only thing. So PFM is much more comprehensive. So PFM is of course includes not only the mobilization of revenues, but allocating the funds, spending the funds, and controlling the funds. So, or the auditing, monitoring side. I don't know, my presentation got lost. Or is it my view?
No, Ruben, Greta?
Perhaps I just continue talking. Is my presentation still on? No.
It's coming. It's coming.
Oh, super. Yes. Okay, thank you. Okay, just the previous slide, please. Okay. And then that's interesting, perhaps for many partner countries as well. We have a so-called SSF program. It's a peer-to-peer, meaning EU member states with all partner countries who might want to ask for short-term support to social protection. This has been very useful as well throughout COVID-19. We have been doing this for many years as well. There's a whole website around SSF Plus. And the last one, this is more of perhaps internal information, but might be interesting for you as well. We have this holistic approach in social protection as well, trying to work cross-sector, meaning we work with ECHO, this is our department for emergency. NEAR, this is for neighborhood countries, ample employment, but above all for EU internal. But we're trying to connect the dots here as well. What we're doing in the European Union is very useful for most of the partner countries as well. Not to name many other departments we work closely with. So this is what we have been doing as a short-term response social protection COVID-19. Next, please. Okay, this is just, you know, and it's nice that we have a colleague here from Cambodia as well, who knows the case on fisheries in Cambodia much better than I do. I've been in contact with our EU delegation just to show you examples what we do in terms of fisheries and social protection in Cambodia. So there are 3 programs in where we support Cambodia and the fisheries sector. 2 of them include big chunks of social protection, and we have been supporting the government of Cambodia throughout the COVID crisis when they had started with this huge program on cash transfers a good year ago. I'm not going into detail here because I think we don't have the time. I mean, it's all on the website of the EU delegation. Next one, please, unless there are questions. This is a bit in the nutshell, you know, of course, I do, like many of my colleagues here, flip through all the documentation which is being put together, the lessons learned around COVID-19 in social protection. I mean, we ourselves, we don't have the perfect tracking system on what's going on out there. I know that Yuka will talk about this in a moment, of course. They have a wonderful tracking system, the weekly reporting. I think the latest was just out now at the end of May. IMF has one, ILO has one, I think UNICEF as well. There's a lot of good literature being out now. What has been done throughout the COVID crisis, short-term social protection, what is getting louder and louder is, of course, the call how this should feed into medium and long-term social protection policy making throughout the world. So quickly, first one is leadership of governments. Of course, no social protection will work in no country if there's not political will of the central government. The second one, national sector planning strategy. So this is very important. We have now, and this is a very good news, over the last years, a lot of partner countries have been putting together national policy, sector policies on social protection, because I was just mentioning how Cambodia is moving. That's fascinating, how quickly this is being done in many countries. So there's a full range of comprehensive social protection system up to patchy systems, but it's developing at an incredible speed. And I think COVID crisis has helped us very much to further develop on this national systems of social protection. And it will surely add that a lot of governments now that they need to add a chapter on disaster preparedness, because this is the lessons learned, not only the reaction, but really being prepared when those kind of crisis comes along. Then use of existing social protection systems and close coordination, so alignment to national policies. I think this is something we have learned in many sectors. This is as well enshrined in what we call the nexus, so linking humanitarian aid and mid and long-term development cooperations. This is very valid for social protection as well. The next point here, institutional arrangements across ministry and agencies. I think this has been mentioned by some speakers here as well, going beyond what is social protection. If we talk about social protection, we need to talk as well to finance, Ministry of Finance, obviously. We need to talk to other sector ministries. So it's not only Ministry of Social Affairs and Labor, obviously. The next one, linked to public finance managed beyond financing. I already mentioned this. Very often there's only the call for additional funds. No. So you need to look into account. This is so important for each country. Solid and updated data and information bases. This is one of the big findings of COVID, and I guess, yes, Yuka will talk about this as well. So a lot of countries have been using their social registries, but there are smarter solutions as well, you know, whatever is there. So data, which is there, if it's patchy again, use other things, some countries have used electricity bills, you know, electoral registries, and so on and so on. So the program which is being distributed can only be so good as the data which is available and needs to be updated. So it needs to be valid data which we are working on. So this has been, and they need to be ready in case of emergency, extremely important. So next point here is function responsive delivery systems. Yes, COVID again has given us a big push towards a data use of electronic data. So there are all this kind of different so databases, how do you call them? So away from physical means of distribution towards e-services, extremely important as well, big push, and we need to get better on this. Not talking only about what's happening in partner countries, I talk about the European Union here as well, what's happening inside. So last one here, reach out to non-social protection experts. Yes, and I mean, we have to point, it's good that we talk here together, we sit around one virtual table, that's a good start. Fisheries on one side and social protection practitioners, this is a good start. So we need to talk about PFM, I said, there's a digital community, sometimes they are techies, we need to work with them. Jobs and inclusive growth, very often, you know, those is a different bunch of people working on jobs, employments, and those working on social protection. When we talk about the informal sector, we need to talk about social protection schemes at the same time. So I stop here. I could talk endlessly about this one. I think perhaps just the last two slides very quickly, if I may. So what does it mean, medium long-term response to social protection for European Union? That's interesting for us. So COVID came in a way in handy for the moment, because we are putting together big new programs for the next 7 years. We have the new programming cycle, European Union here. So we can decide now how we want to knit our social protection programs. So we continue, this is very important, and we have always been doing so. Even we had different crises, 2008, 2009, now the COVID crisis. We continue building sustainable and resilient social protection systems, addressing the whole life cycle. I think that's very important. We have been following this nexus for many, many years now, because this nexus, of course, the SPAN approach, building in humanitarian aid in our social protection scheme, which have to grow and to shrink whenever this is needed. We do this in our geographic and thematic programs, and we have a focus on, last slide. So we have a focus on, and you will find working for the fishery sectors yourself easily in here. The working poor addressing the informal sector, so fisheries, many are in the situation, migration, forced displacement, addressing needs in a globalized world. Again, extremely important for fishers who migrate. We have seen this as well. Changing landscapes, urbanization, social protections, not so much on fisheries, but we have seen this throughout the COVID crisis, how important it is to provide social protection for urban areas. Then different target groups in vulnerable situation. Yes, I think fisher women and men are a very important group here. We have been talking about gender here as well. So very valid points. Crisis situation and the nexus linking humanitarian aid cooperation, social protection, SPAN approach. So this, I just mentioned this, very valid for the COVID crisis. And digital solutions, yes, e-solutions for basic service delivery has been growing a lot right now, possibly has to grow much more. So the next slides are only on the literature, if you can just show them. So this is where you find more information on COVID response of the European Union and INPA policies. So you find a whole bunch of information there. Next one. Here, social protection, what we have been doing for many, many years, you know, our policy guidance, very practical guidance tools. And last one, yeah, this is a wonderful new, partially a publication. We just had our new social protection, the red one, indicators out here. What is important when designing, implementing social protection programs. So, and the last one is a SPAN here, where you can see last slide. We have a full dedicated tool on the nexus, bringing short-term, medium, long-term social protection support together. I thank you very much, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Let's move immediately to Yuku, and I will give you, Yuku, the last words, because we are running out of time. So, Yuku, please, thank you so much again.
And apology for the
please, no problem. Let's move to your presentation, and you will basically wrap up the webinar. Many thanks again.
So let me very quickly go over focusing on our COVID monitoring global response. So I just send you the link, which has been our living document, which monitor what are the pandemic responses in terms of the social protection measures. So this one, again, I hope to give some essence overview today, but all the detailed informations are there, including the global monitoring sheets, which consist of the very detailed information on the each measures. So this is publicly available on the links which I just sent on the chat box. So please have a look for those who are interested in learning more about this. And this has been, again, DB document, which has been published about 15 times since April 2020. And with the latest version being just published late in May. So again, you see the evolution of the number of the countries adopting the COVID measures, which are like yellow bars. And then actually the blue line indicates the number of the social protection jobs measure. And as you see, there's a sharp increase in terms of the number of the countries. By June, there are already 200 countries globally adopting already or starting announcing the certain types of cash transfer program or social protection measures. And you also see the sharp increase. And now we count about over 3,000 social protection job measures are being implemented or already implemented or announced worldwide. So that really shows the magnitude of unprecedented expansion of the cash social protection over last year. Next slide, please. And if you actually really look into what consists of these measures, there are three types of categories. That's also related to Sebastian's presentation, which is like a contributing more a social insurance type versus non-contributing for the social assistance targeted to the poor. And then worldwide, about 55% as a social assistance, while with the two additional 20 being the social insurance, and with 1/4 being the certain type of labor market interventions. But you can really see the difference across the income type. And in the low income countries, major instruments has been really the social assistance form, which is really understandable. Next slide, please. So let's zoom in a little bit on the social protection, specifically the cash transfer program, which has been the frontliner. So when we see the social cash transfer, we usually say the vertical expansion and the horizontal expansions. No, vertical expansion typically meaning the increasing an amount to the existing beneficiary, and the horizontal expansion meaning expanding the coverage, including the new beneficiary to the program. And as you can see, it was under the COVID context, it was a very vertical expansion, a horizontal expansion, because the objective is really to reach out to those large part of the population who were also equally affected by the pandemic due to the economic slowdown and shutdown, regardless of the pre-COVID status, meaning the country really need to reach out to those who are not necessarily poor and vulnerable under the normal circumstance, but those who are really suffered. And especially what we are really increasing since the focus on those who are not covered by either of the system. No, and the typical example is actually the informal sector workers who has a casual job, therefore not typically included in the social assistance program or social registry, but they are also not capable to contribute to the social insurance scheme. So that has been really kind of the focus under the COVID response. And that's also very difficult to reach because these people are not typically included in the any social structures and really being invisible by the government. So just a quick next slide, please.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be quicker. Thank you. And then, so this is two additional slide to show the magnitude of the vertical expansion. So compared to, so this is the selected number of the countries, but compared to the pre-COVID, based on the sample of the countries where the data was available, we are seeing typically on average, these countries actually increased, doubled amount of the transfer to the existing beneficiary. Next slide, please. And this is some quick snapshot of the horizontal expansion. And again, you will see a big difference across the countries, but on average, on the globally, the cash transfer intervention really expanded by 250 times, which is really enormous. Yeah, next slide, please. But the question is how we are going to be financing these, because countries are actually suffering from the economic turn down and shut down, and no, but at the same side, they have to spend more, no, to support those who really need help. So this is this is a brief which was published last year to start looking at the source of financing. And we will see like how the countries are really trying to mobilize the resources, either through the public resources and the external financing. And again, without any surprise, high-income countries tend to be able to finance through the domestic resource mobilization. They are allocating budget and tax revenues and so on. While like low-income country really has to rely on the external funding. So let me quickly, I know this was like a bit hectic presentation, but let me move to the reflections. Our really takeaway, and we are really trying to support the government, even before the COVID, this has been the ongoing agenda, but really invest in the system itself instead of ad hoc shock response, which turned out to be costly and without leaving any system in place in long and medium term. So what does it mean? Like we, I hope you have heard the adaptive social protection term, but this is really actually not only the social protection programs. We talk about the more foundational delivery system, which can be used for different and cross-sectoral programs beyond the social protection, which can include health, education, agriculture, and fisheries. And for example, and also like a social protection system and foundational systems are really known to be used to provide a cash transfer program as a mitigation measures for the price increase and for the process of the subsidy reform, as you may also heard experience from the India. So next slide. So this is how we actually seeing what is really needed, and also to gradually achieve the universal social protection mechanism. Again, we think system and institutional arrangement and the budget are the ready resources, but this foundational system needs to be able to respond when whatever covariate shock happens. It can be COVID in case of last year, but in case of like, it can be really social climate change or beyond. And this system, thanks to the registry, which can capture broader population beyond those who are poor and vulnerable under normal circumstance, it can dynamically reach out, expand the coverage based on the needs. And at the same time, they also have to service needs to be comprehensive, because as an immediate measure, maybe like immediate emergency cash transfers of first phase of the service they really needed. But moving forward, as the COVID situation perpetuates, what are the really kind of like additional services they really need? No? So in terms of like different instruments, social protection and jobs can offer, they have to have a little bit more like deliberation in designing the package of the services. And again, the other side of the coin of the budget is really the adequacy. How much are you going to give versus how many you can reach? And the next is, again, this is also already overlaps with Dorothy's presentation, but we are increasingly already seeing lots of innovations and advancing reform. Some countries already advancing very difficult reform agenda related to the national ID, such as the Philippines, which are really key to make system connected. There are also examples from the Brazil, like the Minister of Agriculture also increase the registry, but they can be really linked with other source of the administrative data to improve the registration and also information based more effectively. And we also seen that very innovative approaches compared to some conventional approaches, especially like African countries, where digital technology, big data, satellite imaging has been really used to reach out to those who have never been reached in the urban slums. And then cross-check there is also plan to gradually cross-check with the other databases in moving forward. And
you have one minute.
Yeah, is another area. And but again, just to finish, let me finish with what we are trying to do as a ongoing work program. There is another study to really look into the financing source in collaboration with other donors, including the UNICEF, IMF, and building upon what I just showed. But this is really try to understand what are the financing composition and how can they really mobilize more effectively. And another thing is like this is a meat of this discussion, but it's also linked with the Sebastian's, Mauritian's, Fabio's example. We are really interested in learning more about how social protection fishery can connect better in the changing climate. And today we had there was a lot of focus and selected good examples, but when we actually see from the overall social protection, it's still small fraction. And I think typically social protection programs are really administered by the Minister of Social Affairs, and while the fishery projects are really led by the different ministry. So we really see the great opportunity to link. So we are really trying to do the stock taking and also support the country team, therefore the government. So we look forward to collaborating more, learning from you, and then moving forward. Thank you so much. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. We really run out of time here, so we will have to end this session. So I would like to thank you all for participating, for being available to be here with us. And I hope this is not the end, but it's the beginning of a fruitful discussion among ourselves, with the fisher folk communities, and really hope that we can really strengthen the social protection agenda in the fisheries and aquaculture sector. Many thanks to all. Thanks so much to Big to Ignore for the opportunity and for the support that you have given us. Thank you very much.
Thanks.